Sometimes the people who have everything are the ones who need love the most. And sometimes the person struggling just to get by has more to offer than they ever imagined. David was a single father doing his best to raise his daughter alone, working long hours just to make ends meet. When he hired Vivian as a piano tutor, he thought it would be simple, a few lessons, nothing more. But Vivian wasn't who she appeared to be. Behind her kind eyes and gentle manner was a wealthy woman who had spent years alone, searching for something real. As she taught his daughter to play, something unexpected began between them. Could their two different worlds come together? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Saturday morning arrived with Sophie bouncing around the apartment like a rubber ball. She'd been awake since dawn, changing outfits 3 times and asking every 15 minutes what time it was. It's still only 10:30. "Sweetheart," David said, trying to keep the amusement out of his voice. "Miss Vivian won't be here for another 3.5 hours. But what if she's early? What if I'm not ready?" "You've been ready since 7 o'clock. David had spent the morning doing his own nervous preparation. He'd cleaned the apartment thoroughly, even though it was always clean. Wiped down surfaces that didn't need wiping. Arranged and rearranged the small keyboard they'd borrowed from a neighbor, trying to find the best position in their tiny living room. The keyboard was a cheap electronic model, probably 20 years old, with keys that stuck occasionally. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. He hoped Vivian wouldn't judge them for it. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sophie froze mid-bounce, suddenly shy. "You want me to get it?" David asked gently. She nodded, moving behind him as he went to the door. Vivian Ashcroft was not what he'd expected. He wasn't sure what he'd been expecting exactly, but it wasn't this. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wore a cream-colored sweater and dark slacks, nothing flashy, but there was an understated elegance to her that spoke of quality. More than that, she carried herself with a kind of grace that seemed out of place in his building's dingy hallway. Like a classical painting hung in a bus station. "David?" she asked, and her smile was genuine. "I'm Vivian. Come in, please." He stepped aside, acutely aware of how small and shabby the apartment must look. "This is Sophie." Sophie peeked out from behind him, and Vivian's entire face lit up. "Hello, Sophie. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Vivian crouched down to Sophie's eye level, not in a condescending way, but with real interest. "Your dad tells me you want to learn piano." Sophie nodded, finding her voice. "My mom used to play. Before she died." Something flickered across Vivian's face, understanding, empathy, a shared sadness David couldn't quite name. "That's a beautiful reason to learn. I bet she'd be very proud of you." Just like that, Sophie's shyness melted. She took Vivian's hand and led her to the keyboard, chattering about the songs she'd heard her mother play, the ones she wanted to learn someday. David hung back, watching. Vivian set down her portfolio. Leather, he noticed, probably quite expensive, and settled onto the small bench beside Sophie. "Before we start, I want to hear what you already know about music. Do you know what these black and white keys are called?" "Piano keys?" Vivian laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to fill the small room. "Well, yes, but do you know their names? Have you heard of notes?" Sophie shook her head. "That's perfect. We'll start at the very beginning then." Vivian's hands moved to the keyboard, and even on the cheap electronic keys, the sound that came out was beautiful. She played a simple ascending scale, naming each note as she went. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back to C, like climbing stairs. Sophie was mesmerized. David watched from the doorway as Vivian patiently showed Sophie where to place her fingers, how to curve her hands, how to press the keys with intention rather than just poking them. "Music is about feeling," Vivian explained. "Even when you're learning the technical parts, remember that you're creating something beautiful. You're telling a story without words," she demonstrated with a simple melody, something David didn't recognize, but that sounded both melancholy and hopeful. Sophie listened with complete attention, her eyes wide. The hour passed quickly. By the end, Sophie had learned her first simple 5-note song, Just Mary Had a Little Lamb, but she played it with such concentration and pride that David felt his throat tighten. When it was time for payment, David pulled out the cash he'd set aside. $20, carefully counted. Vivian looked at it for a moment before taking it, and he could have sworn she hesitated. Her fingers, when they brushed his, were soft. Not the hands of someone who'd done physical labor. Same time next week? Vivian asked, standing and gathering her portfolio. If that works for you. It does. She smiled at Sophie. You did wonderfully today. Practice what we learned, okay? Even just 5 minutes a day will help. I'll practice 100 minutes, Sophie declared. Well, let's start with 10 and see how it goes. David walked Vivian to the door. Up close, he noticed details he'd missed before. The quality of her sweater, soft and clearly expensive. The subtle scent of perfume that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. That watch catching the light again. He didn't know brands, but it looked like the kind of thing people kept in safes. Thank you, he said. She's already excited about next week. She's a natural. You should be very proud. Vivian paused, seeming to want to say something else, then thought better of it. I'll see you next Saturday. After she left, Sophie immediately went back to the keyboard and started practicing her song. David found himself standing in the same spot, looking at the closed door. Something wasn't right. Professional musicians didn't charge $20 an hour. They didn't dress like that and work out of people's apartments for pocket change. He'd seen her portfolio when she set it down. The logo embossed on the leather was from a high-end brand he recognized from store windows downtown. The kind of place he'd never been inside. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, he Googled the name again. Vivian Ashcroft. Still nothing immediately relevant. He tried adding piano teacher and musician to the search, but the results were sparse and unhelpful. Then, on a whim, he searched just Ashcroft and the name of their city. The results that came up made him sit back in his chair. Ashcroft Industries, Ashcroft Museum of Art, the Ashcroft Foundation for Educational Excellence, Ashcroft Family Trust, one of the wealthiest families in the state. Old money, the kind that had buildings and hospital wings named after them. It had to be a coincidence, just a common last name. His Vivian, the piano teacher who charged $20 an hour, couldn't possibly be connected to that family. But the next Saturday, when she arrived, he paid closer attention. The way she moved, the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money. The small things. Her nails were professionally manicured. Her bag was definitely designer, even if understated. And when she took off her coat, the label inside was from a boutique he'd only heard of because Sophie's teacher had once mentioned shopping. There for a special occasion and complaining about the prices. Vivian caught him looking and smiled. Everything okay? Fine, he said quickly. Thank you for coming, but it wasn't fine. Every instinct told him there was more to Vivian Ashcroft's story. Why would someone who clearly had money pretend not to? What was she looking for in his small apartment, teaching his daughter for practically nothing? He wanted to ask, but something stopped him. Maybe because Sophie was so happy. Maybe because, if he was honest with himself, he liked having Vivian around. She brought something into their small world, a lightness, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years, so he said nothing. He paid his $20, thanked her politely, and tried not to think about the mystery sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee and laughing with his daughter. But the questions nagged at him, growing louder each week. And David had learned the hard way that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, always found a way to surface eventually. The following Saturday, Vivian arrived with a gift. Nothing ostentatious, just a slim book wrapped in brown paper. I hope you don't mind, she said, handing it to Sophie. I saw this and thought of you. Sophie tore open the paper to reveal a beginner's music theory workbook, the kind with colorful illustrations and fun exercises. David glanced at the price sticker that Vivian had forgotten to remove. $35. More than he'd paid for the entire week of lessons. You didn't have to do that, he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. I know. I wanted to. Vivian smiled at Sophie, who was already flipping through the pages with delight. Every student should have the right tools. After the lesson, David did something he hadn't planned. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" "It's the least I can offer after you brought Sophie such a nice gift." Vivian's face brightened in a way that seemed almost relieved. "I'd love that." They sat at his small kitchen table, while Sophie practiced in the living room, the simple melody of her exercises floating through the apartment. David poured coffee into mismatched mugs and tried not to think about how out of place Vivian looked in his humble kitchen. "She's doing really well," Vivian said, wrapping her hands around the mug. "She has natural rhythm and a good ear. Those are things you can't really teach. Her mother was the musical one. I can barely carry a tune. Tell me about her." "Your wife." David hesitated. He didn't talk about Sarah much, not because he didn't want to, but because most people didn't really want to hear. They asked out of politeness, then looked uncomfortable when he actually answered. But something in Vivian's expression told him she was genuinely asking. Her name was Sarah. She worked as a nurse, loved old movies, and could play piano by ear. She'd hear a song on the radio and sit down and just figure it out. He smiled at the memory. "Drove me crazy sometimes. How talented she was at everything. How long has it been?" 3 years. Cancer. It was fast. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. Vivian reached across the table and touched his hand just briefly. Her fingers were warm from the coffee mug. "I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. Still is some days." He looked down at his coffee. "The medical bills wiped us out. We had insurance, but not enough. I had to sell almost everything, including her piano. That's why I can only afford that cheap keyboard for Sophie." "The instrument doesn't matter," Vivian said firmly. "What matters is the music. Some of the greatest pianists I've known practiced on kitchen tables when they were learning. You studied seriously then?" "At a conservatory." "I did." Something flickered in her expression, too quick to read. "A long time ago. What made you stop?" "If you don't mind me asking." Vivian was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. "Life got complicated. Family obligations, expectations. Sometimes the things we love get pushed aside by the things we're supposed to do." There was a sadness in her voice that David recognized. "The sound of dreams deferred or abandoned entirely. Do you have family nearby?" he asked. "Yes and no. They're in the city, but we're not close." She looked up, offering a small smile. "I don't see them much. It's easier that way." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise her, as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "I live alone. No children. Most relationships didn't work out. I'm not very good at the whole social connection thing. You're great with Sophie. Children are easy. They don't have ulterior motives. They don't want anything from you except your attention and kindness." The comment struck David as odd, weighted with meaning he didn't fully understand. Before he could ask about it, Sophie burst into the kitchen. "Daddy, Miss Vivian, come listen. I can play it without looking at my hands now." They followed her to the living room, and she demonstrated her new skill with such pride that both adults applauded. Vivian knelt beside her, adjusting her posture slightly, encouraging her. "You're a natural, sweetheart," Vivian said, and the genuine affection in her voice made David's chest tighten. After Vivian left that afternoon, Sophie turned to him with serious eyes. "She seems sad, Daddy. What makes you say that?" "I don't know. She smiles a lot, but her eyes are sad. Like she needs friends." David pulled Sophie close, amazed once again by his daughter's perceptiveness. "You might be right about that. Can we be her friends? Not just teacher and student, but real friends?" "I think we already are, Sophie." The week that followed, David found himself thinking about Vivian more than he should. At work, Peter noticed him staring into space during their lunch break. "All right, what's going on?" Peter asked, unwrapping his sandwich. "You've been somewhere else all week." "It's nothing, it's something. I've known you 5 years. You don't get distracted like this over nothing," David sighed. "The piano teacher. There's something about her that doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "She's too polished, too refined to be charging $20 an hour. Everything about her screams money, but she's working out of people's apartments for pocket change. And she's lonely, Peter, really lonely, like she's hiding from something." Peter studied him carefully. You like her? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I can hear it in your voice. Peter took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. Be careful, man. You don't know her story yet. I know. That's what worries me. By the third lesson, a routine had formed. Vivian would arrive, teach Sophie for an hour, and then stay for coffee. They'd talk while Sophie practiced. Conversations that felt both comfortable and charged with unspoken questions. Vivian asked about his work, his life before Sarah died, his hopes for Sophie's future. He found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone since his wife passed. There was something about Vivian's quiet attention, the way she listened without judgment, that made it easy to talk. In turn, she revealed small pieces of herself. She'd studied at a prestigious conservatory in Boston. She'd been on track for a concert career. Something had happened, she didn't say what, and she'd walked away from it all. Do you ever regret it? David asked. Every day, she smiled sadly. But we all make choices. Sometimes the right choice still leaves you wondering about the path not taken. It's not too late, is it? To go back? I'm 36 years old. That's ancient in the classical music world. Besides, I chose a different life. I need to make peace with that by teaching, by trying to find meaning in other ways. She looked at Sophie, still diligently practicing. Your daughter gives me more joy than any concert hall ever did. The comment sat heavy between them. David wanted to ask more, to understand what she meant by chose a different life. But Sophie interrupted, wanting to show them both her progress. After Vivian left that day, David found an envelope in the kitchen. His name was written on it in elegant script. Inside was a note on expensive, cream-colored stationery, the kind with weight and texture that spoke of quality. Dear David and Sophie, thank you for welcoming me into your home. These Saturday afternoons have become the highlight of my week. Your kindness means more than you know. With gratitude, Vivian. David held the note, feeling the expensive paper between his fingers. The stationery probably cost more than his electric bill. The handwriting was impeccable, the kind taught in exclusive schools. Everything about it confirmed what he already suspected. Vivian Ashcroft was not who she pretended to be, but the words themselves, the genuine warmth in them, those felt real. Whatever secret she was keeping, her affection for Sophie was authentic. Her loneliness was real, and if David was honest with himself, the way his heart lifted when she walked through his door each Saturday was very real too. He tucked the note into the drawer where he kept important things, next to Sophie's birth certificate and Sarah's wedding ring. He didn't know why he kept it, or maybe he did, and just wasn't ready to admit it yet. That night, as he was putting Sophie to bed, she looked up at him with serious eyes. Daddy, do you think Miss Vivian is lonely because she doesn't have a family like us? Maybe, sweetheart. We should make sure she knows she's part of our family now, even if she's just our teacher. David kissed her forehead. You have a good heart, Sophie. Just like your mom. After she fell asleep, he stood at her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. Somewhere across the city, Vivian was probably in her real home, whatever and wherever that was. He wondered if she was lonely there, if she thought about their small apartment with its worn furniture and cheap keyboard, if she looked forward to Saturdays the way he found himself doing. The questions multiplied with each passing week, but David didn't ask them, not yet. Because for now, whatever fragile connection they were building felt too precious to risk with uncomfortable truths. 4 weeks into their arrangement, Vivian made a suggestion that changed everything. Sophie's progressing faster than I expected, she said, after the lesson, during their now customary coffee. There's a small community recital in 6 weeks at the Riverside Community Center. I think she should perform. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? Like on a real stage? A small stage, but yes. You'd play for an audience, other students, their families. It's a wonderful experience. David's mind immediately went to logistics and costs. What would that involve? Just preparation. I'd help her select a piece. We'd practice it until she's confident. She'd need something nice to wear, but nothing fancy. Vivian turned to Sophie. What do you think? Would you like to try? Yes. Sophie bounced in her seat. Can I, Daddy, please? He couldn't say no to that face, even as he mentally calculated expenses. A new dress, maybe new shoes. The recital itself might have a registration fee. We'll figure it out. Over the next 2 weeks, Vivian came twice weekly instead of once, refusing any additional payment. This is part of teaching, she insisted, when David tried to give her more money. I don't charge extra for recital preparation. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair to me. Her tone was gentle but firm. Please, David, let me do this. His pride stung, but Sophie's excitement overruled it. They compromised. He'd handle what costs he could, and Vivian would help with music selection and intensive practice. The piece Vivian chose was perfect. A simple arrangement she'd created herself, based on one of the melodies Sarah used to play. When David heard it, his throat tightened. How did you know? He asked quietly while Sophie practiced. You mentioned your wife played that song. I thought it would be meaningful. Vivian's voice was soft. Music should connect us to the people we love, even the ones we've lost. David had to turn away for a moment, collecting himself. When he turned back, Vivian was watching him with understanding in her eyes. Thank you, he managed. That means more than you know. The intensive preparation brought them closer. Vivian started arriving earlier, staying later. More than once, David insisted she stay for dinner. Simple meals of pasta or grilled chicken. Nothing fancy, but shared with warmth and laughter. During one of these dinners, Sophie fell asleep on the couch mid-conversation, exhausted from practicing. David carried her to bed, and when he returned, he found Vivian studying the photos on his bookshelf. She was holding his wedding photo, taken 9 years ago. Sarah in her white dress, him in his suit, both of them young and full of hope. She was beautiful, Vivian said softly. Sophie has her eyes. She does. David stood beside her, looking at the photo he saw every day, but rarely truly looked at anymore. Sarah would have liked you? You think so? I know so. She always said you could tell a person's character by how they treat children. You're wonderful with Sophie. Vivian set the photo down carefully. Sophie makes it easy. She's special, David. You should be very proud. I am. Even when I feel like I'm failing her. You're not failing her. Vivian turned to face him directly. You're giving her everything that matters. Love, stability, encouragement. The fancy stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as you think, says the woman who clearly comes from fancy stuff. The words were out before he could stop them. Vivian froze. I don't know what you mean. Vivian. He kept his voice gentle. I'm not blind. Your clothes, your jewelry, the way you carry yourself. The stationery you wrote that note on probably cost more than I make in a day. She looked down at her hands. Does it matter? I don't know, does it? They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound Sophie's soft breathing from the bedroom. My family has money, Vivian finally admitted. A lot of it. I grew up in that world, went to the right schools, did all the things I was supposed to do. But that life, it's isolating. People want things from you. Access, connections, your name on their donor lists. Nobody just wants you. Is that why you charge $20 an hour? I charge $20 because I wanted to find people who'd value me for what I can offer, not for who my family is. I wanted something real. She looked up at him, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. This is real, David. Teaching Sophie, talking with you, being part of your lives. This is the only genuine thing I've had in years. David's anger softened. Why didn't you just tell me? Because once people know, everything changes. They either treat you differently or they want something. I couldn't bear the thought of that happening here. Her voice dropped. I'm sorry if you feel deceived. That was never my intention. He studied her face, seeing past the polished exterior to the lonely woman beneath. I don't feel deceived, just confused. Why us? Why this? Because when I called you back that first day, you sounded like a father who'd do anything for his daughter. And that's, she paused, searching for words, that's the kind of person I wanted to know. Someone who values what's truly important, the moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken understanding. David realized they were standing very close, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Sophie stirred in the other room, and they both stepped back. I should go, Vivian said quietly. It's late. Same time tomorrow for practice? Yes, if you still want me to come. We do. He walked her to the door. Vivian, the money stuff, I don't care about it. But no more secrets, okay? If we're going to be friends, real friends like Sophie said, we need to be honest with each other. She nodded, relief evident in her expression. No more secrets. I promise. After she left, David stood by the door for a long moment. At work the next day, Peter took one look at him and laughed. You've got it bad, don't you? I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. The piano teacher who's actually rich, who spends all her free time at your apartment, who looks at your kid like she's her own. You don't see what's happening? Nothing's happening. She's Sophie's teacher. Right, and I'm the president. Peter clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, I think it's good. You deserve some happiness, man. Sarah would want that for you. David didn't respond, but Peter's words stayed with him. Sarah would want him to be happy. She'd said as much near the end, making him promise not to spend his life alone. But this wasn't just about happiness. This was about Sophie, about not disrupting the stability they'd built. This was about not risking the one good thing that had come into their lives in 3 years, except it was already too late for that. Vivian had become part of their routine, their family, their lives. And David was starting to realize that the risk wasn't in letting her in. It was in the possibility of losing her. The recital was 4 weeks away. 4 weeks of intensive practice, shared dinners and conversations that grew longer and more personal each time. 4 weeks of David catching himself watching Vivian when she wasn't looking, noticing the way she laughed at Sophie's jokes, the gentle patience in her teaching, the sadness that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. 4 weeks of falling for someone he wasn't sure he had any right to fall for. Someone whose world was so different from his that the distance seemed insurmountable. But when Saturday came and Vivian walked through his door with sheet music and a bright smile, those doubts faded. Because in his small apartment, with his daughter at the keyboard and coffee brewing in the kitchen, none of the differences seemed to matter. Here, in this moment, they were just 3 people building something precious together. And David was determined to protect that, no matter what secrets still remained to be uncovered. The week before the recital, Vivian arrived looking stressed. David noticed it immediately. The tight set of her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone, the distraction in her eyes, even as she smiled at Sophie. Everything okay? He asked during Sophie's water break. Fine, Vivian said, but her fingers were tapping nervously against her coffee mug. Just some family things I need to deal with. She didn't elaborate, and David didn't push. But throughout the lesson, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Each time she glanced at it and her jaw tightened. Finally, during Sophie's practice time, she looked at the screen and her face went pale. I'm sorry, I need to take this. She stepped into the hallway, and even through the closed door, David could hear the tension in her voice. Not the words, but the tone, defensive, frustrated, pleading. She came back 5 minutes later looking shaken. I'm sorry about that. Where were we? But the lesson was disrupted. Vivian tried to focus on Sophie, but David could see her mind was elsewhere. When the hour ended, she gathered her things quickly. I'll see you tomorrow for the final practice before the recital. Vivian, wait. David touched her arm gently. What's going on? You can talk to me. For a moment he thought she might. Her eyes filled with something that looked like tears, quickly blinked away. Then she shook her head. It's nothing I can't handle. Family politics, that's all. I'll be fine. But as she left, her folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. David knelt to help her gather them. And that's when he saw it, a newspaper clipping dated from last year. A photo from what looked like a charity gala. Women in evening gowns, men in tuxedos, champagne glasses catching the light. And there, in the center of the group, unmistakably was Vivian. She wore a stunning silver gown, her hair styled elaborately, surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of a society magazine. The caption read, Philanthropist Vivian Ashcroft at the annual Ashcroft Foundation Gala. David stared at it, his mind making connections he'd been avoiding. Ashcroft Foundation. The same one he'd found when he'd Googled the family name, Ashcroft Industries. Ashcroft Museum. Vivian saw him holding it. The color drained from her face. David Ashcroft. His voice came out flat. As in Ashcroft Industries? The Ashcroft Museum? That Ashcroft? She closed her eyes. Yes, Sophie called from the living room, oblivious to the tension. Daddy, can I show Miss Vivian the drawing I made? In a minute, sweetheart. David stood, still holding the clipping. Can we talk outside? They stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind them. The harsh, fluorescent lighting made everything feel too bright, too exposed. Why didn't you tell me? David asked, working to keep his voice level. I asked about your family. You said you had money, but this... He gestured with the clipping. This is different. How is it different? Because there's having money, and then there's being one of the wealthiest families in the state. Buildings are named after your family, Vivian. I looked it up weeks ago. Your family owns half the city. That's an exaggeration, is it? Because from where I'm standing, you let me worry about affording piano lessons while you, what? Slummed it for fun? Played teacher to feel better about yourself? The words came out harsher than he intended, fueled by wounded pride and confusion. Vivian flinched, as if he'd struck her. That's not fair, isn't it? I've been killing myself trying to give Sophie opportunities, counting every penny. And you've been sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee, while your family throws galas that probably cost more than I'll make in my lifetime. I never asked you to struggle. I never judged you for... That's exactly the point. You never had to. You can afford to be understanding and kind, because none of this touches you. At the end of the day, you get to go back to your real life. This is my real life, her voice cracked. These Saturday afternoons, teaching Sophie, talking with you, this is the only real thing I have. Then why lie about it? Why the pretense? Because people like you... She stopped, catching herself. People like me what? Say it. People who work hard and struggle and sacrifice for their families. You're the real ones. The genuine ones. My world is full of people who care about appearances and connections and who your family is. Nobody cares who you are. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now. I posted that ad because I wanted to find something authentic. Someone who'd value me for what I could give, not what my last name could do for them. David felt his anger wavering, but held on to it. So you found me? The poor single dad who'd be grateful for cheap lessons and wouldn't ask questions. No, I found a father who loves his daughter more than anything, who works 2 jobs to give her a better life, who makes her lunch with little notes inside and keeps her mother's memory alive. Vivian's voice dropped. I found someone who reminded me what matters. And yes, I should have told you sooner. But I was terrified that if you knew, everything would change. It has changed. It changed the moment I saw this. He held up the clipping. Sophie's voice came through the door again, questioning now. Daddy? They both looked at the closed door, then back at each other. I need to get back to Sophie, David said quietly. And you should probably go. David, please, I just need some time to think. Okay, Vivian nodded, wiping her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. What about tomorrow's practice? The recital is Saturday. He'd forgotten about the recital. Sophie had been preparing for weeks, was so excited. He couldn't take that away from her because of his own feelings. Come tomorrow. For Sophie. We'll figure out the rest after. Okay. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry, David. I never meant to hurt you. After she left, David stood in the hallway for a long moment before going back inside. Sophie looked up from her drawing, her face falling when she saw he was alone. Where's Miss Vivian? She had to go, sweetheart. She'll be back tomorrow. Is she okay? She looked sad when she left. She'll be fine. David hoped he was telling the truth. Come on, let's practice your recital piece one more time. That night, after Sophie was asleep, David sat at his kitchen table with the newspaper clipping. In the photo, Vivian looked beautiful but untouchable, like she belonged to a different world entirely. A world of charity galas and museum openings and foundations that gave away more money in a year than he'd earn in a lifetime. He thought about the past 6 weeks. The coffee table conversations, the shared dinners, the way Vivian looked at Sophie with such genuine affection, the way his heart had started to lift when Saturday came around. The way he'd begun to imagine, though he'd never admitted it even to himself, what it might be like to have someone in his life again. All of it built on a foundation that wasn't quite honest. But was that fair? She'd told him her family had money. She'd been nothing but kind and generous with Sophie. She'd given them both something precious: joy, purpose, connection. Did it matter that the scale of her wealth was larger than he'd imagined? His pride said yes. His heart wasn't so sure. He pulled out his phone and Googled Ashcroft Foundation Gala on impulse. Page after page of photos came up. Vivian at last year's event, the year before, going back 5 years. Always beautifully dressed, always surrounded by important-looking people, always with that same look in her eyes he'd noticed in that first photo, present but not really there, going through the motions. The most recent article mentioned that this year's gala was scheduled for this coming Saturday. The same day as Sophie's recital, David sat back in his chair. That's what the phone calls had been about. That's why she'd looked so stressed. Her family expected her at their event, and she'd committed to Sophie's recital instead. She was choosing them over her family, over duty and expectation and whatever obligations came with being a member of one of the city's most prominent families. The realization didn't fix everything. His pride was still wounded, and the class divide between them felt more insurmountable than ever. But it shifted something, made him see her choice in a different light. He looked at the clipping one more time, then folded it carefully and tucked it away. Tomorrow, Vivian would come for Sophie's final practice, and somehow they'd have to figure out how to navigate this new reality between them, because whether he liked it or not, Vivian Ashcroft had become important to both him and Sophie, and losing her would hurt more than his pride ever could. The next morning, a package arrived at David's door. Inside was a dress for Sophie, simple but beautiful, exactly the right size, in a soft blue that would look perfect on stage. No note, no card, just the dress, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. David's jaw tightened. He knew it was from Vivian, knew she meant well. But it felt like charity now, like confirmation of the gulf between their worlds. Sophie discovered it before he could hide it away. "Daddy, look how pretty!" "Sophie, we can't accept this." "Why not?" "Is it from Miss Vivian?" Her face lit up. "Can I wear it for the recital?" David looked at his daughter's excited face and felt his resolve crumble. He couldn't explain the complex emotions churning in his chest to an 8-year-old. Couldn't take away her joy over something so simple as a pretty dress. "Yes, you can wear it. She's so nice, Daddy. Don't you think she's nice?" "I do, sweetheart." When Vivian arrived that afternoon for their final practice session, the atmosphere was strained. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept. David offered coffee out of habit, and they sat in awkward silence while Sophie practiced. "Thank you for the dress," David finally said. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted Sophie to feel confident on stage. That's all. Vivian, please, can we just focus on the recital? I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. But Sophie's worked so hard. Can we put everything else aside for one more day?" He nodded, and they turned their attention to Sophie's performance. Whatever personal tension existed between them, they were both professionals when it came to Sophie's well-being. Vivian coached her through the piece one final time, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. "You're going to be wonderful," Vivian told Sophie at the end of the session. "I'm so proud of you. You'll be there tomorrow, right? To watch me?" Vivian glanced at David, uncertainty in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be there." After Sophie went to play in her room, David walked Vivian to the door. "You don't have to come if your family needs you somewhere else. My family always needs me somewhere else." "Sophie needs me tomorrow?" She paused, hand on the doorknob. "I choose Sophie. I choose this. Whatever you think of me now, please believe that." The recital arrived with Sophie barely able to contain her excitement. She put on the blue dress and twirled in front of the mirror, her face glowing. David helped her with her hair, his hands clumsy with the effort of making it look nice. They arrived at the community center early. The small auditorium was filling with families, the air buzzing with nervous energy. Young musicians tuned instruments and practiced scales. Parents adjusted collars and took photos. David scanned the room for Vivian. No sign of her yet. 15 minutes before the performance started. Still no Vivian. Sophie kept looking toward the entrance, her confidence starting to waver. Where is she, Daddy? I'm sure she's just running late, sweetheart. But doubt gnawed at him. Had she chosen the gala after all? Had family pressure won out? 5 minutes to start time. The director was asking everyone to take their seats. Sophie's turn would be in the first half. David's phone buzzed, a text from Peter wishing them luck, but nothing from Vivian. Sophie's face fell as they took their seats. David pulled her close, his heart breaking for her. You can do this even if she's not here. You've practiced so hard, but I wanted her to see. I know, baby. I know, the recital began. 2 children performed before Sophie. David barely heard their music, too focused on his daughter's anxious face and the empty seat beside them. Then the director called Sophie's name. She stood slowly, reluctantly. David gave her an encouraging smile he didn't quite feel. She walked to the stage, looking so small and alone at the piano. She sat down, positioned her hands over the keys. Her fingers trembled. David held his breath. Then, the back door of the auditorium opened quietly. Vivian slipped inside. Her hair was slightly disheveled, makeup not quite perfect, wearing simple slacks and a blouse instead of her usual polished appearance. She'd clearly rushed from somewhere, but she was there. Sophie saw her. Their eyes met across the room. Vivian smiled and gave a small, encouraging nod. Sophie's shoulders straightened. Her hands steadied. She began to play. The music filled the small auditorium, the simple melody that Vivian had arranged, the one based on Sarah's favorite song. Sophie played it beautifully, with feeling and confidence that seemed to surprise even her. Every note was clear, the timing nearly perfect. You could hear in the music not just technical skill, but emotion, the understanding that this piece meant something. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Sophie stood and took a small bow, her face radiant with pride and relief. David applauded hard enough that his hands stung, his throat tight with emotion. His little girl, who'd lost her mother too young, who'd been asking for piano lessons for months, had just performed on stage. And she'd been magnificent. After the recital ended, Sophie ran to Vivian first, throwing her arms around her. Vivian caught her, holding her close, eyes bright with tears. You were perfect, Vivian said. Absolutely perfect. Then Sophie ran to David, and he lifted her, spinning her around. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud, other parents stopped to congratulate them. David introduced Vivian as Sophie's wonderful teacher, and she smiled and accepted their compliments graciously. For a few minutes, they were just another family celebrating a child's achievement. But eventually the crowd thinned, and they found themselves alone in the parking lot. Sophie, exhausted from excitement and nerves, had fallen asleep in the back seat of David's car almost immediately. David and Vivian stood in the fading evening light, the weight of unspoken words between them. Thank you for coming, David said quietly. It meant everything to her. I wouldn't have missed it. Vivian looked drained but peaceful. My father called 17 times during the performance. My brothers sent increasingly angry texts, but I kept my phone off. Some things matter more than family obligations. Vivian, I know you're still angry. I know you don't trust me the way you did before, but I need you to understand something. She turned to face him fully. These past 2 months teaching Sophie, being here with you both, it's not some rich person's hobby. It's not me slumming it or trying to feel better about my privilege. Then what is it? It's me trying to be the person I actually am, instead of the person my family needs me to be. It's me finding something that matters. Her voice dropped. It's me falling for a little girl who reminds me what joy looks like. And it's me realizing that her father is the most genuine, good-hearted man I've ever known. David's breath caught. Vivian, I'm not asking for anything. I know the distance between our worlds is too great. I just needed you to know that what I feel here, with you and Sophie, that's real. That's the one true thing in my entire life. They stood close enough that David could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of rejection mixed with desperate hope. He thought about his anger, his wounded pride, his certainty that someone from her world could never really belong in his. Then he thought about the past 2 months, her patience with Sophie, her genuine laughter at his kitchen table, The way she'd rushed here tonight, choosing them over whatever grand event her family had demanded she attend. "I'm not angry anymore," he said finally. "I was hurt, confused, but I'm not angry. No, my late wife used to say that you judge people by their actions, not their circumstances. You've shown me who you are, Vivian. Every Saturday, every lesson, every conversation. That's real. I believe you." Relief flooded her face. "So we can keep doing this? The lessons, the friendship? On one condition." David took a breath. "No more secrets. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, we do it honestly. All of it. Your family, your wealth, the pressure you're under, I want to know. Not because I'm judging you, but because friends don't hide from each other. Friends." She smiled softly. "Is that what we are?" "I think we're trying to figure that out." He glanced at Sophie sleeping in the car. "But yeah. At minimum, we're friends." Vivian nodded slowly. "Okay, no more secrets. I promise." She paused. "Fair warning, my life is complicated. My family is demanding. There's a lot of pressure and expectation that comes with my name. I'm a widowed single father, working 2 jobs to raise an 8-year-old in a too small apartment. Complicated doesn't scare me." She laughed, a real laugh that seemed to release the tension she'd been carrying. "Then I suppose we'll figure it out together." "Together," David agreed. They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave. In the car behind them, Sophie slept peacefully, her recital dress still perfect, her confidence restored. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Same time next Saturday?" Vivian asked. "Same time." As David drove home that night, Sophie still sleeping in the back seat, he felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, it was too soon for that, but possibility, the sense that maybe, against all odds and logic, something good was beginning to take shape in his life. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Vivian's car, following them toward the city, and allowed himself to wonder what came next. 2 weeks after the recital, something had shifted. The honesty between them created a new ease, a comfort that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Vivian started sharing more about her world, the board meetings, the charity dinners, the constant demands on her time and attention. "They want me to marry someone appropriate," she said one afternoon, the words tumbling out during coffee. Sophie was in the next room practicing scales. "My father has introduced me to 3 different business heirs in the past month alone." David's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "Do you want to?" "No, God, no. But it's what's expected. Strengthen alliances, merge families, all that archaic nonsense." She laughed without humor. "I'm 36. They're running out of patience with my eccentricities, as they call them. Eccentricities like teaching piano to working-class kids." "Exactly like that." She met his eyes. "They see it as a phase, something I'll grow out of once I accept my responsibilities. What do you see it as?" "The only time I feel like myself." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Their lessons continued, now with a deeper understanding. David learned about the mansion she lived in, 15 rooms she rattled around in alone, the staff who maintained it but never really talked to her, the galas and functions where she was expected to appear and smile and represent the family name. In turn, he shared more about his life after Sarah died. The grief that still caught him off guard sometimes. His fears about Sophie growing up without a mother. His dreams of someday being able to give her more than just survival. One evening after an especially good lesson, David did something impulsive. "Stay for dinner?" "It's just spaghetti, nothing fancy, but Sophie would love it." Vivian's face brightened. "I'd like that." They cooked together, Vivian proving hilariously incompetent in the kitchen despite, or perhaps because of, her wealth. She'd never learned to cook, had never needed to. David taught her how to brown ground beef and boil pasta, and they laughed at her clumsy attempts to help. Sophie set the table with exaggerated care, clearly delighted to have Vivian staying. They ate together, the conversation flowing easily, and it felt almost like a family. After dinner, Sophie declared she needed to show Vivian her room and all her drawings. David cleared the table, listening to their laughter and chatter from down the hall. When they returned, Sophie yawned hugely. "Bedtime for you." "Sweetheart," David said, "but Miss Vivian is still here. I'll still be here when you wake up next Saturday," Vivian promised. After Sophie was tucked in, David and Vivian found themselves on his worn couch, 2 glasses of wine between them. It was the most intimate they'd been, alone in the quiet apartment, with no lesson or meal to provide structure. "I haven't been this happy in years," Vivian admitted softly. "Maybe ever. Me neither." David looked at her, really looked at her. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was closed. That I'd had my chance at happiness and that was it. And now I'm not so sure. Now I think maybe—" A sharp knock at the door interrupted him. They both jumped. David glanced at his watch. 9:30, too late for casual visitors. He opened the door to find a courier in a dark suit, holding an envelope. "David Martinez." "No, I'm David Chen. My apologies." "Is Vivian Ashcroft here?" David's stomach dropped. He turned to see Vivian standing behind him, her face pale. "How did you know I was here?" she asked the courier. "Your family has had you followed, ma'am. I was instructed to deliver this immediately." He handed her a thick legal envelope and left without another word. Vivian stared at the envelope like it might bite. Her hands shook as she opened it. David watched the color drain completely from her face as she read. "Vivian, what is it?" She handed him the letter silently. It was from Ashcroft and Associates, her father's law firm. Legal letterhead, formal language, but the message was clear and brutal. Vivian had 2 weeks to return to her family responsibilities, attend board meetings, fulfill social obligations, accept the role she was born into, or face consequences. The family would remove her from the foundation board. Her trust fund would be frozen. She would be publicly disowned and removed from all family business. David read it twice, anger rising with each word. "They're threatening you?" "It's not that simple." Vivian's voice was hollow. "The foundation funds dozens of charities, scholarships for underprivileged students, medical research programs. If I'm removed, whoever replaces me might not continue those priorities. Hundreds of people depend on decisions I make. What about what you depend on? What about your happiness? Does my happiness matter more than their futures?" She looked at him with anguished eyes. "I have the power to help people, David. Real, meaningful help. What right do I have to walk away from that for selfish reasons? Living your own life isn't selfish, isn't it? When the cost is other people's welfare?" David wanted to argue, but he understood. He'd given up his dreams of architecture for Sophie's stability. He knew what it meant to sacrifice personal desires for responsibility. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "For the first time in my life, I have something I don't want to lose. You, Sophie, these Saturday afternoons, feeling like I matter for who I am rather than what I can give." She looked around his small apartment. "This is the closest thing to home I've ever known." David pulled her close, and she buried her face against his shoulder. He held her while she cried, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. When she finally pulled back, her makeup was smudged and her eyes were red. She looked more human than he'd ever seen her. "I need to attend a family meeting this week," she said. "They'll demand an answer. Don't go alone." "Let me come with you." "David, no. You don't understand what they're like. Then help me understand. You said no more secrets. That means you don't face this alone." She searched his face, looking for something. "Why would you do that?" "Because you matter to me. Because Sophie loves you. Because friends don't let friends face their demons alone." He paused. "And because maybe we're more than just friends, and we both know it." The admission hung in the air between them. Vivian's eyes widened. "David, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that whatever you decide, you're not alone in this. We're here. We're with you." She kissed him then, sudden and desperate. It was brief, just a moment, but it felt like crossing a threshold they couldn't uncross. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Vivian whispered. "I need to think. When's the meeting?" "Thursday. 2 o'clock at the estate. I'll be there. They'll eat you alive. Let them try." After she left, David stood at his door for a long moment. He'd just promised to confront one of the wealthiest, most powerful families in the city. He had no plan, no strategy, nothing but the certainty that Vivian shouldn't face them alone. Peter was going to think he'd lost his mind. He probably had. But as he checked on Sophie, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing, he knew he'd do it anyway. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. Vivian had given them both so much: joy, purpose, hope. Now it was his turn to give something back, even if it meant walking into a world he didn't belong to and standing up to people who could crush him without a second thought. He pulled out his phone and texted Peter, "Need a favor. Can you watch Sophie Thursday afternoon?" The response came quickly. "What are you getting yourself into?" David smiled grimly as he typed back, "Something stupid and necessary." Peter's reply, "The best things usually are. I've got Sophie. Go be brave." David set the phone down and looked at the legal documents still lying on his coffee table. 2 weeks to comply or lose everything. 2 weeks for Vivian to choose between the life she was born into and the life she actually wanted. 2 weeks for them to figure out if what they were building together was strong enough to survive the weight of expectations, family pressure, and a class divide that seemed designed to keep people like them apart. He didn't know if they could win, but he knew they had to try, because somewhere between piano lessons and kitchen table conversations, somewhere between laughter and shared vulnerability, he'd fallen for Vivian Ashcroft. Not the heiress, not the philanthropist, but the lonely woman who'd found a home in his small apartment and his daughter's smile. And he'd be damned if he'd let her face this battle alone. By trusting that you can find a way to do both. There has to be a middle ground. My family doesn't do middle ground. It's all or nothing with them. Wednesday evening, Vivian asked to meet him at the same park where they'd talked weeks ago. She brought something with her, a small music box, delicate and clearly old. "This was my grandmother's," she said, placing it in his hands. "She was a pianist too, gave up her career when she married into the family. My father told me she was happy, fulfilled. But I found her journals after she died. She wasn't. She spent 40 years wondering what might have been if she'd chosen differently." David opened the music box. It played a soft, melancholy melody. "I don't want to be her," Vivian continued. "I don't want to spend my life wondering. But I also don't want to be selfish. I don't want to abandon people who need help. Then don't. Fight for a compromise. Make them see that you can contribute to the foundation while still having your own life. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's worth trying." He handed the music box back. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because if things go badly tomorrow, if I can't find that compromise, I want you to give this to Sophie. Tell her about my grandmother. Tell her to always choose her own path, no matter what anyone expects. Vivian, promise me, David." He took the music box, his throat tight. "I promise. But you're coming back. We're going to figure this out." She smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." That night David could barely sleep. He lay awake thinking about what he'd say to Vivian's family, how he'd defend her choices, how he'd make them understand. But every scenario he imagined ended with them dismissing him, a warehouse supervisor who had no business interfering in their family affairs. Peter had agreed to pick Sophie up from school and watch her. David had taken the afternoon off work, using precious vacation time he couldn't afford to lose. He dressed in his best clothes, a suit he'd bought for job interviews years ago, slightly worn but clean and pressed. Before leaving, he tucked his warehouse ID badge into his pocket, a reminder of who he was, where he came from. He wouldn't pretend to be something he wasn't, no matter how intimidating Vivian's world might be. The drive to the Ashcroft estate took him through neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier. Modest homes gave way to mansions, then to genuine estates with gates and long driveways. When he finally reached the address Vivian had given him, his breath caught. The gate alone probably cost more than his entire apartment building. Beyond it, he could see a mansion that looked like something from a movie. Stone and columns and perfectly manicured grounds stretching in every direction. He almost turned around, almost convinced himself this was a terrible idea, that he had no place here, that he was being foolish and presumptuous. Then he thought of Vivian's face when she'd given him the music box. the fear and hope mixed together. The way she'd said she didn't want to spend her life wondering, he pressed the intercom button. A crisp voice answered. Yes? David Chen, I'm here to see Vivian Ashcroft. A pause. Are you expected? No, but she'll want to see me. Another pause, longer this time. Then the gate swung open. David drove through, his old car sounding especially rough on the pristine driveway. He parked and walked to the front door, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. A stern-looking woman in professional attire answered. Mr. Chen? Miss Ashcroft is currently in a family meeting. I know. That's why I'm here. I'm afraid family meetings are private. Then I'll wait. The woman looked uncertain, then stepped aside. The library is this way. She led him through halls that seemed designed to intimidate, art that probably belonged in museums, furniture that looked too expensive to sit on, everything pristine and cold. Nothing like the warm chaos of his apartment, with Sophie's drawings on the walls and mismatched furniture. Finally, they reached a large door. Voices came from inside, heated, argumentative. The woman knocked. The voices stopped. Yes? A man's voice, sharp with irritation. Sir, there's a Mr. David Chen here to see Miss Ashcroft. Silence. Then Vivian's voice, shocked. David! The door opened. Vivian stood there, surrounded by men in expensive suits, her father, David Guest, and her brothers. A lawyer with a briefcase. All of them staring at him like he'd just materialized from another dimension, which in a way he had. David, what are you doing here? Vivian's eyes were wide with surprise and something that looked like hope. David took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and stepped forward. I'm here because you shouldn't face this alone. Vivian's father, an imposing man with silver hair and cold eyes, looked David up and down with obvious disdain. Who are you? I'm Sophie's father. Vivian's been teaching my daughter piano, the warehouse worker. The father's tone made it sound like an insult. Vivian's little charity project. David met his gaze steadily, refusing to be diminished. I'm not a project, and neither is she. The room went very still. Vivian was staring at him, tears forming in her eyes. Her father's expression hardened. This is a private family matter. You need to leave. No, David said simply. I don't think I do. The silence in the library stretched out, taut as a wire. Vivian's father studied David with the kind of gaze that probably made CEOs nervous. David felt every eye in the room on him, judging, dismissing. He reached into his pocket and felt the warehouse ID badge there. A reminder. I asked you a question, the father said coldly. Who do you think you are to interrupt a private family meeting? I'm someone who cares about Vivian. Someone who sees her value beyond what she can do for your foundation or your business interests. One of the brothers, the older one, judging by his age, stepped forward. This is absurd. Security should have stopped him at the gate. David, please, Vivian said quietly. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, he turned to her. You've given Sophie and me so much. Let me give you something back. Let me stand with you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. David turned back to face her father. Despite his fear, despite feeling completely out of his depth, he kept his voice steady. I understand you're discussing Vivian's future. Her responsibilities to your family and foundation. That's correct. And it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Because Vivian matters to me. My daughter loves her. And He took a breath. I care about her deeply. The younger brother laughed without humor. Let me guess. You expect us to believe this isn't about money? That you're not angling for access to our family's wealth? I don't want your money. I never have. Everyone wants our money, the father said flatly. That's the only reason anyone gets close to this family. Then I'm different. David met his gaze without flinching. I'm a warehouse supervisor. I work 2 jobs to raise my daughter. I live in a 300-square-foot apartment, and most months I'm barely scraping by. Your money means nothing to me because it can't give me what I already have. And what's that? A daughter who's thriving. A home filled with love instead of empty space. The knowledge that the people in my life value me for who I am, not what I can provide. He glanced at Vivian. Your daughter has been teaching piano to my 8-year-old for $20 an hour. She's had dinner at my kitchen table. She sat on my second-hand couch drinking cheap wine. And she's been happier there than I bet she's ever been in this mansion. The father's jaw tightened. You presume to know what makes my daughter happy. I know that she lights up when she teaches. I know she stays late after lessons because she doesn't want to leave. I know she chose a child's recital over your family's gala because that's where she wanted to be. David's voice grew stronger. You see her as an obligation, a responsibility, a name on your foundation board. I see her as a person, a talented, compassionate woman who deserves to live her own life. Her life is here, managing the responsibilities she was born into. No, Vivian said suddenly, her voice ringing clear. Everyone turned to look at her. My life is wherever I choose to make it. Her father's expression darkened. Vivian, you've been talking about my obligations, my responsibilities, what the family needs from me. But no one's asked what I need, what I want. What you want is irrelevant, the older brother said. This is about legacy, about maintaining what generations built. It's about control, Vivian countered. About keeping me in line, making sure I fulfill the role you've assigned me. She moved to stand beside David. But I'm done living for your expectations. The attorney spoke up, his voice measured. Ms. Ashcroft, if I may remind you of the terms outlined in the document, refusal to comply means removal from the foundation board, freezing of your trust fund, and public disownment, the father finished. You'll be cut off completely. No family support, no access to resources. Is that really what you want? David saw Vivian waver, saw the weight of that decision pressing down on her. What about the foundation? She asked. The scholarships, the medical research, the charities I oversee, they'll continue, her father said dismissively. Someone else will manage them. Someone who might not prioritize them the way I do. Someone who might cut programs that don't generate good publicity, the father shrugged. That's not your concern if you choose to walk away. It was a manipulation, David realized. Using her compassion against her, making her feel guilty for wanting her own life. There's another option, David said. All eyes turned to him. She doesn't walk away completely. She negotiates. Part-time involvement with the foundation, the projects she cares most about. Advisory role instead of full board membership. She contributes her expertise without sacrificing her entire life. We don't negotiate with family members, the father said coldly. Then maybe you should start. David's voice was firm. Because from where I'm standing, you're about to lose your daughter entirely. Not because she doesn't care about the foundation or the family legacy, but because you're giving her no other choice. The younger brother scoffed. And what do you offer her instead? Poverty, struggle, life in some cramped apartment working for pennies. I offer her respect. I offer her the freedom to be herself. And yes, I offer her love. David said the word clearly, without shame. Something I'm not sure she's ever gotten from this family. Vivian's hand found his. Her fingers were shaking, but her grip was strong. Her father's face had gone cold as stone. If you walk out that door with him, Vivian, you're making a choice you can't take back. Vivian's father moved to his desk and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside was a ring, elegant, clearly expensive, glinting in the library's soft light. Your mother's ring, he said, his voice taking on a different tone. She wore this when we built the foundation together. When we established everything this family stands for, Vivian's breath caught. David felt her hand tighten around his. Your mother dedicated her life to this family's legacy, her father continued. She understood duty, responsibility. She knew that personal desires came second to the greater good. He held the ring out toward Vivian. She would want you to carry on her work, to honor what she built. It was a calculated move, David realized. Using guilt, using love, using memory to manipulate her into compliance. Vivian stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face now. Don't do this. Don't use Mother against me. I'm not using her. I'm reminding you of who you are, who you come from. Mother told me something before she died, Vivian said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. She said she hoped I'd be braver than she was, that I'd choose my own path instead of just accepting the one laid out for me. Her father's expression flickered. She never said that. She did. In the hospital, near the end, when it was just the two of us. She held my hand and told me not to make her mistakes, not to sacrifice everything for duty. Vivian's voice broke. She told me she loved this family, loved the work, but that she'd also lost herself in it. And she didn't want that for me. The room fell silent. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable. That's not true, her father said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. It is true. You just didn't want to hear it. Vivian wiped her tears. Mother built something meaningful, yes. But she also gave up her music, her friends, everything that made her who she was. I found her journals, Father. I know she struggled. I know she wondered what her life might have been. Her father's hand closed around the ring box. She was happy. She was dutiful. That's not the same thing. The older brother stepped forward. This is getting us nowhere. Vivian, you need to make a decision. Are you coming back to the family, or are you throwing everything away for some fantasy with a man you barely know? I'm not throwing anything away, Vivian said firmly. And I know David better than I've known most people in my life. Because he's genuine. Because he doesn't want anything from me except my company. Because when he looks at me, he sees me. Not the Ashcroft name, not the foundation, not the money. Just me. She turned to face her father directly. I'll continue advisory work with the foundation. The scholarships and medical research programs I oversee. I'll stay involved with those. Part-time on my terms. But I'm done with the galas and the society dinners and the arranged meetings with appropriate men. I'm done letting you control my life. That's not acceptable, her father said coldly. Then cut me off. Freeze my trust fund. Publicly disown me if you need to. Vivian's voice was steady now, sure. I'd rather have nothing and be myself than have everything and lose my soul. The younger brother laughed harshly. You won't last 6 months. You've never worked a real job in your life. You have no idea what poverty actually means. Then I'll learn. Vivian looked at David. I have a good teacher. David felt something swell in his chest. Pride. Love. Admiration for this woman who was choosing uncertainty over comfort. Risk over security. Her father set the ring box down with a sharp click. You're making a mistake, Vivian. When you realize that, and you will, don't come crawling back expecting us to take you in. I won't. Vivian took a deep breath. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not making a mistake. I'm making a choice. My choice, she turned to David. Can we go now? Yes, he said softly. Let's go home. They walked toward the door together. Behind them, the family remained silent. Watching, at the threshold, Vivian paused and looked back one more time. I do love you, Father. All of you. And I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do this. But whether you do or not, I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing happiness. I'm choosing love. Her father's face was stone. Then you're no longer my daughter. The words hit like a physical blow. David saw Vivian flinch, saw the pain flash across her face. But she didn't crumble. If that's how you feel, I'm sorry. Her voice was quiet but steady. But I'm still going. They walked out together, through the opulent hallways, past the expensive art and furniture, out into the sunlight. With each step, David felt Vivian's grip on his hand grow firmer, more certain. When they reached his car, she finally broke down, sobbing against his chest. He held her, letting her cry, feeling the weight of what she'd just done, what she'd just sacrificed. You were so brave, he murmured into her hair. So incredibly brave. I'm terrified, she admitted. I just walked away from everything. No, you walked toward something better. He pulled back to look at her face. You walked toward yourself. Toward us. She kissed him then, deep and desperate and real. When they pulled apart, both were crying. What happens now? She asked. Now we go pick up Sophie from Peter's. We tell her you're going to be around a lot more. And then, he smiled, then we figure out the rest together. Together, she repeated, the words sounding like a promise. As they drove away from the mansion, David glanced in the rearview mirror. The estate grew smaller behind them, the gates closing like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Beside him, Vivian stared straight ahead, tears still falling, but a smile starting to form. She'd given up wealth, security, family approval, but her shoulders were straighter than he'd ever seen them. She'd chosen freedom. She'd chosen herself, and she'd chosen them. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. 3 months later, David woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the sound of piano music drifting from the living room. Not the electronic keyboard anymore, but a real piano, modest, upright, second-hand, but real. He'd saved for it over 12 weeks, working extra shifts, cutting every corner he could. When he'd finally brought it home, Sophie had cried with joy. But the look on Vivian's face, pride mixed with love, that had made every sacrifice worth it. He found them at the piano together, Vivian guiding Sophie's hands through a new piece. Sophie had progressed remarkably in the past months, now preparing for a regional youth competition. But more than her technical skill, it was her confidence that had grown. She played with joy, with feeling just like her mother once had. "Morning, Daddy," Sophie called without stopping her practice. "Morning, sweetheart." He kissed the top of her head, then Vivian's cheek. "You're here early?" Couldn't sleep. Vivian smiled up at him. Too excited about today. Today was Saturday, but not just any Saturday. Today, Vivian was teaching at the community center, her third class of 8 students, all from low-income families. She charged what they could afford, which was often nothing at all. She funded the program from her savings. What remained after her family had frozen her trust fund. She'd moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from David's. 1 bedroom, modest furnishings, a far cry from the mansion she'd left behind. But every time he visited, it felt warm, lived in, real. She decorated it with Sophie's drawings and photos of the 3 of them. The past 3 months hadn't been easy. Vivian had struggled with the basics of independent living, cooking, budgeting, managing bills. David had taught her patiently, the same way she'd taught Sophie piano. They'd laughed at her mistakes, celebrated her small victories. Her family hadn't reached out, not once. The society pages had run a brief notice about Vivian Ashcroft, stepping back from family obligations to pursue personal interests. The gossip had been vicious for a few weeks, then faded as new scandals emerged, but something unexpected had happened. Vivian had negotiated her way back onto the foundation board, part-time, focusing only on the education and medical research programs she cared about. It had taken weeks of careful discussion with the board members directly, bypassing her family entirely. They'd seen the value she brought and created a compromise her father couldn't undo without looking petty. She worked 20 hours a week, enough to make a difference, not enough to consume her life. The rest of her time was hers, for teaching, for Sophie, for building the life she actually wanted. "Breakfast?" David asked, heading to the kitchen. "I'll help." Vivian stood, patting Sophie's shoulder. "Keep practicing that section, sweetheart." In the kitchen, David and Vivian moved around each other with easy familiarity. She'd learned to crack eggs without getting shell everywhere. He'd learned to let her help without feeling like he needed to do everything himself. "I heard from the foundation yesterday," Vivian said, buttering toast. "The scholarship program I restructured? We're funding twice as many students this year." "That's wonderful." "It is. And I did it on my terms, working hours that don't consume my entire life." She smiled. "Turns out I can make a difference without sacrificing everything." After breakfast, they walked Sophie to the community center together. Other families waved, recognizing them now as regulars. Vivian's students gathered around her excitedly, showing her what they'd practiced. David watched from the back of the room as she taught, patient and encouraging with each child. This was who she was meant to be, not performing at galas or sitting through board meetings, but here, making music accessible to kids who couldn't otherwise afford it. Sophie sat beside him. "Miss Vivian is happy now, isn't she, Daddy?" "I think she is, sweetheart. Are you happy?" He pulled her close. "Yeah, I really am." "Good, because I think we're a family now. The 3 of us." Out of the mouths of children, David thought, came the clearest truths. That evening, after the classes ended and they'd walked back to his apartment, Vivian lingered at the door. These days, she often stayed for dinner, sometimes for the whole evening. But there was still a hesitation, a question of boundaries neither had quite defined. "Stay," David said simply. "It's Sunday tomorrow. We could have breakfast together. The 3 of us." Vivian's eyes brightened. "I'd love that. They cooked dinner together while Sophie practiced. Simple pasta, a salad, nothing fancy, but shared with warmth and laughter, it felt like everything. After Sophie went to bed, David and Vivian sat together on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Walking away from all that?" "Not once." She lifted her head to look at him. "I miss my mother. I wish my father could understand, but regret leaving. Never. She gestured around the small apartment. "This is the first real home I've ever had. It's just a small apartment. It's not about the space. It's about what's in it." She touched his face gently. "It's about love that isn't conditional, about being valued for who I am, about waking up each day and choosing the life I want instead of the one expected of me." He kissed her, soft and slow. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," he said. The words felt both monumental and simple. "I love you too." She laughed softly. "I fell in love with a single father in a tiny apartment who taught me that wealth isn't measured in money. And I fell in love with a woman who gave up everything to find herself." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the building around them, the city beyond. Somewhere across town, in a mansion filled with expensive things and empty rooms, Vivian's family continued their lives without her. But here, in this small space filled with music and laughter and love, Vivian had finally found what she'd been searching for all along. She'd found home. She'd found family. She'd found herself. And sometimes, David thought as he held her close, that was worth more than all the money in the world.